Okay, so this is a comparison of two intake manifolds. On my left is the Edelbrock air gap. Its real name is the RPM air gap, but and then on my right is the good old Performer. This is the pre 86 Performer. It was bought a long time ago. It's not as good as the newer ones, but it's pretty close. All right, so let's talk price. The air gap is around $230, while the Performer is only about $160. So this one is significantly cheaper. Okay, let's talk torque. The Performer is basically just a cast aluminum version of the old cast iron manifolds that Chevrolet put out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So torque is about the same with this one as with the stock manifold. However, it flows significantly more than the stock manifold did. But this Performer will perform better low end, as in like 1,000 RPM. It will produce more torque than the air gap will, but not really that much more. A few tests showed around 8 pound-feet more at around like 1,000 RPM with this manifold versus the air gap, that's not really that much. So if your car is like a towing vehicle or you never see that many high RPMs, you would probably go with this one. As for horsepower, the intake runners on the air gap are a lot larger and a lot longer. So this one works up to 1,500 RPM to 6,500 RPM, while this one dies out at around 5,500. So this one flows better, obviously, because the intake runners it's a lot taller, as you can tell, than this one, and obviously that's going to help your port velocity top end. The air gap does not have an exhaust. It's an exhaust port on the Performer, like the stock one had, and it's right here. Basically, exhaust from your heads runs through here to heat up the manifold. That's good, but the problem is it heats up the manifold too much, and it was boiling the fuel in my fuel bowls. Which hurts gas mileage considerably, because your gas, instead of being mixed into a vapor with the air, it's just goes to nothing. That was a problem. So if you do have this manifold, you need to block off those ports. They sell metal plates that are made for this, and you just plop them on and then put your gasket on. Unless you live in like a super cold climate, I mean like snowing every day, you should plug those up. And that was hurting a lot of low-end torque and fuel economy. Obviously, the air gap, it gets its name from the gap underneath the entire manifold, hence air gap. So it doesn't get heated up by the engine as much as the Performer did. That cold air bears a big advantage for torque and horsepower. However, most tests showed a very small difference in torque and horsepower with the raised intake runners, but the idea is sound, however. Okay, for the brackets on the Performer, this will bolt on right to the old one. All your brackets will fit on there perfectly. You won't have any problems. However, on the air gap, the brackets are a little bit different, and my alternator bracket, which mounted here and there, would not fit because the intake runner is wider on the edge, while this one has room on the sides. And this one is lowered about 3/4 of an inch, while this one's level with the thermostat housing. So I'm going to have to fabricate something up myself, which is not a big deal. Most people can figure something out. The kickdown bracket used to be this honking thing right here on the old one. It's for a 700R4 or Turbo 350. It mounted basically like like this, and then I cut off the piece that connected from the back there, and that held the kickdown bracket, and if you have a 700, the TV cable. I just cut off a chunk and I made a spacer that is hollow, and it'll fit right there. And this is for the turbo 350 kickdown bracket, and it'll mount about right there, and it lines up with my carburetor perfectly. So if you do switch to this manifold, you will have to modify things a little bit. Obviously, most car guys know when you switch something, there's always unforeseen problems, and that's just one of them. Not too big of a deal. Also, the bolts, when you're bolting in these manifold, the old bolts on this manifold and the stock one will not work on the RPM air gap because there's a lot less room in between the holes and the actual casting itself. So you will not be able to get a socket through there correctly. So Edelbrock supplies bolts that you can buy. I think they're like $12 for a set. And they're smaller, but they're stronger than the original ones. They have a smaller head on them, so you can actually get a tool like a torque wrench on there to tighten them up. Okay, one of the biggest advantages of the air gap is the coolant bypass. On this manifold, the water in the heads stops there. There's no place for it to go, and it just kind of puddles there. There's a lot of buildup from the water in these ports, and the water just kind of swirls there and gets trapped, and then that water then goes back through the heads and into your radiator to be cooled down. Edelbrock had a very good idea. Basically, they have, instead of having it blocked off, their intake ports have a hole that goes all the way through, and this is a 3/8 MIP thread. I don't even know what that stands for, but that's what the thread is. So basically what you can do is have 90-degree fittings that run from here all the way to the front, and then it'll go through into your thermostat housing and then back into your radiator. This keeps your heads significantly cooler than they used to be, because water that's been going through your engine is going to be preheated by it, obviously, and instead of it going through your heads twice, being extremely hot, it goes through there once. So your heads will run much cooler, which means you could run maybe a little higher compression, more timing, all big benefits, all really big benefits, especially with cast iron heads. On my car, it kept dieseling because my heads were running too hot, so I could turn off the car and it continued to fire a couple times, which is a little uneasy, and this should solve that problem. On the RPM air gap, it does not come in a spread bore. It only comes in the square. That is the only thing it comes with, and this comes for all sorts of manufacturers: Ford, Pontiac intakes, Chrysler. Edelbrock makes these manifolds for all types of cars. This one comes in a square and a spread bore. This is for like a quadrajet or a Holley version of the quadrajet, which is this guy. Never buy this carburetor. It is a 4175 piece of junk. This is the worst carb Holley has ever made by far. But as you can tell, that is definitely a spread bore. See the huge... Oh, that's a bunch of gas. Anyways, never buy this carburetor. It's crap. Carter AFB all the way. So you won't be able to put your quadrajet on here. Do not put one of the converter spacers on here. That'll convert a square bore to a spread bore. That is a proven power robber that will hurt you top end, low end, fuel economy, emissions, everything. And on emissions, this manifold will pass smog if you have it on a car that requires that, because it is basically just a copy of the original one, just in aluminum, and the intake runners are a little bit different, but not quite. But they help a lot. like a lot versus stock. The plenum divider on the RPM bare gap is for top end. That basically shares a little bit of each plenum and has a small effect on top end, like like a single plane Victor or something. But this doesn't hurt any low end torque, which is why they did that. Another note, a dual plane intake, which is what these are pretty sensitive to how much flow your carburetor has, like the CFM rating. So definitely don't undercarburate your engine even for gas mileage, because it'll end up biting you in the end. But another thing to add is the RPM has small casting marks that are a little thicker on the edges. That is for nitrous if you have that or want that. Basically, you tap into these and then you put your nitrous fittings, which is pretty cool. So overall, this manifold is around $50 to $70 more expensive, but it is worth it because you have more horsepower, cooler engine, cooler intake runners, the coolant bypasses, and it just overall looks pretty good. It looks like a high-rise, but it's not. So I would highly suggest one of these for any mild street small blocks or big blocks. Big blocks really like these intakes. But if you're like in a really cold climate or your truck never sees over like 2000 RPM, I would go with the Performer. That's about it, and I hope this helped you.